Welcome, everybody. Today we are joined by Claire Manis and Dr. Michael Carroll, who are going to speak with us about coaching in the age of safe sport, investigation, litigation, and human impact. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Claire.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Claire Manis. I'm a PhD student at Troy University, and Dr. Carroll, my faculty advisor, is joining us. My background is in federal criminal defense, and that's one of the a little bit of an impetus behind this presentation. I've been an attorney practicing almost exclusively in federal court since 2006, and I do still practice, although that's a challenge while earning a PhD. So I have done work in district courts in Texas and in Michigan. And again, almost exclusively in the federal criminal context, but you'll see there's a lot of crossover with SafeSport. So that's why I bring up that background here. But today we're going to be talking a lot about the SafeSport system, the legal underpinnings of it, and where it may or may not be going. But the emphasis that I want to put on it, the theme for today, is sort of the human side of reporting and some of the scholarly research that's been done on who reports and why. I think it's very easy for us when we think of SafeSport, we think of Larry Nassar, and that makes perfect sense. It's actually in the legislative history. He is a major motivating factor behind Congress's inaction of the legislation that gave us a recognized nonprofit entity to police in sport. And it's easy to think of him as the unfortunate face person of SafeSport. But I want to put a little bit of a human spin on this to show that not everyone who's being reported as an alleged wrongdoer or someone responsible for misconduct in SafeSport is necessarily a Larry Nassar. So I want to give us a little bit more of a feeling of the full spectrum of what's going on with SafeSport reporting. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn to the slides. I want to make this as interactive a session as possible. And I know that our format here isn't the most conducive to that. If we were in a more of a classroom setting, I think we could interact a little more easily, but I will take planned breaks where we'll exit the slides, and I'll ask you if you have any questions to submit them to the chat board and kind of share, and I'll try to address those. But I'll go ahead and get started with screen sharing now, and we'll launch into what SafeSport is and why we need to know about it. So the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, a lot of people believe that it went into effect in 2017 because of the legislation that gave the nonprofit entity recognition. But there has been a movement for a policing agency in the sport for several years. There was a whole set of commissions and committees and planning seminars and sessions leading up to the actual enaction of the legislation that gave us SafeSport. And I'll back up just a little bit for anyone who's not as familiar with the legislative systems that underlie our Olympic movement. So SafeSport, getting very basic here, is an allegedly independent nonprofit organization. They are just a nonprofit entity, just like you would have any of the national governing bodies are nonprofit entities or a local charity, an independent organization chartered as a nonprofit with tax exempt status. Now, I say allegedly independent because under the statute that we'll talk about in a minute, they are listed as a non-government actor and an independent corporate entity. If you come to CERLA in March, we'll talk about why that's probably not accurate under the case law and that they probably are a state actor recognized by Congress. But that's kind of beyond the scope of what we'll talk about today. But we have a nonprofit entity known as the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. It's in place to police wrongdoing in the Olympic sector in America. Because in the 70s, we had the Ted Stevens Olympic and Amateur Sports Act. This was kind of a collection of legislation to bring together a cohesive plan for America's participation in the Olympic Games. And it gave recognition to the national governing bodies. There's a lot of discretion given to those governing bodies, so courts don't get involved in selecting Olympic teams when there are disputes and things like that. We've got our national governing bodies. They are the ones that govern America's participation in the U.S. Olympic Games. They answer to the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. They had that name change a couple of years ago from U.S. Olympic Committee to U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. But so that's our structure. begins in the 70s with the Ted Stevens Olympic and Amateur Sports Act. It's in, for those who want to look it up, it's in Title 36 of the US Code, starting at Section 220501. Again, governs national governing bodies for the Olympics. In 2017, following the whole USA Gymnastics scandal and Larry Nassar, we get the Protecting Young Victims from Sexual Abuse and Safe Sport Authorization Act. And it's under this act that amends prior provisions of the Ted Stevens Act that we get congressional recognition of this independent nonprofit as a prosecutorial or policing agency to make Olympic sports in America safer for the participants. It's I think most people think of SafeSport as preventing sexual abuse of minors, but that is not all it does. There's physical abuse, bullying, mental abuse, verbal abuse, and it applies to adults as well. I'll ask later during the break if anyone has had any experience with SafeSport, either being contacted as a witness in an event, or if you do have a legal background, if you've ever been asked to represent someone, if you've made a report or been someone who's been on the receiving end of a report. These reports, at least in the sport that I'm involved in, and I do still shoot archery competitively, and that is an Olympic sport for us. And I did shoot an Olympic bow, and I did participate in the first stage of the Olympic trials, both for Sydney, going way back and dating myself, and also for Paris in 2023. In archery, when we see SafeSport, we see a lot of reporting, and that's where I'm going to talk about maybe some of the misuse of reporting. But there's a lot. So when I say, have you made a report, or have you been someone who allegedly engaged in wrongdoing and was contacted by SafeSport, it's pretty common, especially if you're coaching. This isn't something where just monsters like Larry Nassar are getting reported. And then in 2020, during COVID, we had the Empowering Olympic and Paralympic and Amateur Athletes Act of 2020 that expanded Congress expanded the powers of SafeSport such that if national governing bodies or the U.S. Olympic Committee are not taking this seriously, the national governing body can lose its recognition as an Olympic governing body, and potentially the board of the USOPC could be suspended. SafeSport is a priority, and it's a global priority now too. We see SafeSport organizations. I personally have had contact with people in Britain and Israel, where at least with their archery program, they use a similar paradigm as the one in the US. And there's some scholarly literature we'll get into where they're using this in South Korea. But so why are we here? Again, we've got Larry Nassar. And then according to the legislative history of this Empowering Amateur Athletes Act, we're here because of the courageous voice of survivors. The women on the USA gymnastics team, the women who came forward, these young athletes. And we've got this call to prevent this from ever happening again. But specifically, why are we here in this session? We're here because of one of Larry Nassar's victims. Her name is Alexis Moore, and she was reported to SafeSport as having engaged in coaching misconduct with her mother at a gym in Michigan. So now I want to get into the meat of why we are here in this session. And it is because of a case that's currently pending in the Eastern District of Michigan in federal court on the eastern side of Michigan, which is basically Detroit. And two coaches there, Nancy and Alexis Moore, they coach at their own gym in Michigan, and they were accused anonymously by some athletes and parents of engaging in misconduct. And there was a report made to SafeSport that ended in 3 years of investigation into these women. And I want to go through the nature of some of that reporting and the claims they're now making against SafeSport for having mishandled the investigation. And again, the theme here is to put a human face on SafeSport reporting. So where Alexis was the victim of Nassar's abuse, she's now being accused of, or was accused, she's been exonerated at this point, but her mother remains in the investigation process. But they've both been accused of wrongdoing. And currently, Nancy Moore is on the SafeSport database with Larry Nassar. And we'll get into why that may be significant in a moment. But these local gymnastics coaches first faced a SafeSport reporting initiation. And I want to go into a little bit about the initiation of a report with SafeSport if you aren't familiar with it. There's a portal online so that anyone involved in the Olympic movement can go online and make an anonymous report. They can say, you know, I was abused, my child was abused, I witnessed an abuse at an event, I suspect abuse. It's anonymous, and the recipient of the allegation, the person who, I'm going to refer to them as the defendant, given my background, and it seems the easiest way to do it. The defendant does not know who their accuser is, and they don't have a right to see the report that's made. This is contrary to the criminal justice system in America. We're very transparent when it comes to criminal charges. If you're accused of wrongdoing, there is an indictment or a complaint. There's a charging document that tells you what the allegation is and who's making it. There are redactions to protect minor victims and things, so it's not all public record sometimes. But generally, if you're accused of a crime in America, you know who's accusing you and you know what they're saying you did. SafeSport, you do not know that. It's an anonymous reporting system, and you don't know what the full allegation is. The SafeSport investigators just tell you kind of as a need-to-know basis, you've been accused. There are temporary measures placed against you saying you can't go to an event and talk to people, or maybe you can't compete at all. You may be suspended. And there is no speedy trial right in the United States. You have a right to be brought to trial within a certain period of time. In SafeSport, these investigations can go on for years. And with the Moores, it went on for 3 years. There was a recent report in the Wall Street Journal about a victim who felt she had not received justice because the investigation went on for 6 years. And the alleged wrongdoer in that case actually then applied to be a coach in the United States and passed the SafeSport background check to coach in this country. This had been a foreign coach that she had reported as an abuser. And then he was admitted having passed their background check while her allegation was being investigated. But again, that's kind of beyond the scope of this discussion. But suffice it to say, someone filed an anonymous report against the Moores, accusing them of wrongdoing in sport. Here, it was not following a concussion protocol. It was not spotting athletes correctly in the gym. It was allegedly having an athlete compete while injured. We'll go into those details in a minute. But they make this anonymous report. An investigator then contacts the two coaches and says, you have some temporary measures placed against your coaching. You have to have a witness with you and your coach. You can't coach unattended. And then the process kind of moves into limbo and goes on for 3 years of investigation. I know from personal experience, because I have been in contact with SafeSport once because of an athlete who asked me if I could talk to them on their behalf. You don't get updates on the investigation. And SafeSport goes out and talks to witnesses asking, you know, can you tell us anything about this coach that's been accused of wrongdoing? Can you tell us anything about this alleged incident? And witnesses may or may not come forward and talk. There's no subpoena power as we would have in the criminal system. You don't have this system where you can force someone to talk or bring them in for a hearing. You just have these voluntary witnesses giving whatever information they can give. I've actually been asked to be a witness once and didn't have any information I could offer on these athletes. But I'm going to start now a video so you can get a better feel of the initial allegations against the Moores.
Leading to a suspension. A gymnastics coach at Bay Valley Academy has been suspended for 2 years by the U.S. Center for Safe Sport for what they call physical and emotional misconduct.
TV5's James Felton spoke with the attorney who represents this gymnastics coach, and he tells us those allegations aren't true.
Attorney Russell Prince tells us the allegations against his client, Nancy Moore, a gymnastics coach at Bay Valley Academy, are
100% false.
Moore has been suspended by the U.S. Center for Safe Sport for what they call physical and emotional misconduct. According to the U.S. Center for Safe Sport website, the suspension is subject to appeal, not yet final.
Not only can she not coach anywhere in the country in the sport of gymnastics for 2 years, but she can't receive a membership or coach underneath the Olympic movement, so 83 or more national governing bodies of sports.
Prince believes the U.S. Center for Safe Sport treats allegations as fact.
It's an organization that's got a very, very significant problem with the ease at which people can manipulate facts and circumstances within the sport in order to essentially effectuate these types of outcomes.
For its part, the U.S. Center for Safe Sport had no comment, citing the ongoing investigation. TV5 has learned some of the allegations against Moore include not following concussion protocol and forcing a gymnast to compete with a broken arm.
Your concussion thing is from a family that refused to actually provide a concussion come back to the gym. Your complaints regarding a broken arm and mistreatment and being forced to compete is from an ex-employee who effectively forced her own daughter in order to participate in the meet for the sole purpose of being able to manipulate an insurance issue with USA Gymnastics. Like, we could do this all day, but again, I think it's better suited for the courts.
Which is exactly where Prince is planning to go.
We have hundreds of pages of documentation, and we have hundreds of pages of messages, and we have an entire history of connections to these people and dozens of witnesses that are going to stand up against them when we have the opportunity to actually defend ourselves.
Prince tells us Moore is not facing any criminal charges related to these allegations. James Felton, WNEM, TV5.
He tells us his client plans to exhaust every legal remedy to make every single aspect of what's happened completely public.
So that is where the allegation started with SafeSport. They get this allegation against the two coaches, they suspend them, and then these two coaches sue in federal court saying SafeSport's mishandling the investigation and has mishandled its treatment of these two coaches. Now, I want to back up just a little and introduce you a little more to Alexis Moore, the younger coach, the daughter of Nancy. She is a plaintiff in the case. So Nancy and Alexis are suing SafeSport for mishandling the investigation. And they're claiming a number of things. You can see them on here: breach of contract, interference with a business relationship, defamation. I won't read all those to you, but those are what we call the causes of action that the Moores have brought against SafeSport, saying SafeSport mishandled the investigation. Now, under the statute that Congress has governing SafeSport, you can't sue SafeSport. And so that in itself is being challenged here. And we may or may not have time to get into some of that. I'm guessing we won't have time, but we'll get into more of that at CERLA in March, if any of you happen to be going out for CERLA's conference in Myrtle Beach. But so this is Alexis Moore, and I want you to meet her a little bit. This is her victim statement she delivered after being a victim of Larry Nassar's misconduct. I've picked out just two little pieces. It was a long statement. She did a very nice job, and I just want you to meet her a little more.
Mr. Nassar convinced me that he was the only person who could help me recover from multiple serious injuries. To me, he was like a knight in shining armor. But alas, that shine blinded me from the abuse. He betrayed my trust, took advantage of my youth, and sexually abused me hundreds of times. Mr. Nassar out the flaws in the system and what others could have done to protect my innocence. That truth will one day be exposed. But it is my job to make a difference and an impact on the world, and to help stop monster-like humans from abusing their power. I am working on forgiving you, Mr. Nassar. One day I will be able to, but I will never forget what you have done.
So that's Alexis again, and she and her mom end up on this SafeSport database as alleged wrongdoers during the pendency of the allegations against them. I'm going to skip the videos on Nancy because we don't have a ton of time, but otherwise I would introduce you to Nancy and her coaching. And I'm not going to talk about the jurisdictional issues again because of time issues. But one of the issues that arose is the way SafeSport handled its investigation, specifically against Alexis. Alexis reported that she was having suicidal ideations because now she's being treated in the same way as her own abuser was being treated with this database. It's a publicly accessible database. It lists over 2,000 people right now who are suspended from the Olympic movement because of sexual, physical, mental abuse they've committed against athletes or other wrongdoing. You can also be listed there if you aided and abetted somebody else, or you somehow abused the process of the SafeSport process by, helping someone try to circumvent it. So there are a few ways people end up on this database. But these women who had suffered so much at the hands of Larry Nassar end up on this database. Alexis says that she's suffering suicidal ideations, and SafeSport sends back a rather callous email saying, hey, you can just go seek mental health help. And one of the allegations against them in this suit that Alexis and Nancy have filed is, again, this mishandling of the investigation with regard to Alexis's mental health, because everybody knew her situation as a fragile victim. So again, the database as of this week, I did check, and Nancy is still on there. And so is Mr. Nassar right there with her. And so you can imagine how that impacts his family. And again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it is an impact for the family. Now, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit so that you can see this citation. If you're interested in these issues, this citation from Tak Kim and Rind is a very excellent article on application of the SafeSport reporting process in South Korea. And they go into some of the reasons people use the SafeSport process appropriately, what we call good use, why they may not use the process at all, why they may be afraid to come forward and report legitimate abuse, and that we would call non-use, and then what we call misuse, where there may be reporting, but it might not be an appropriate reporting, or a parent or athlete may be using it as a negotiating chip to get something they want from a coach, whether or not the coach has actually committed some sort of actionable wrongdoing. And so they divide the use of the system into good use, non-use, and misuse. And what I think is really important about their research is they ask us to consider the athletes as multidimensional agenic individuals, agents of their own destinies. So we don't have a system where, in truth, we just have innocent victims or righteous witnesses. Obviously, I think as scholars, we know that's probably an oversimplification in any situation. We have agents, and they're making choices when they choose to come forward and either report or not report abuse or misconduct by a coach or another athlete or another figure in the sport. Now, I'd wanted to take a break at this point to ask questions, but I'm going to push through given our time constraints, because I do want to touch on some thoughts that predate SafeSport in terms of policies here. And one of the things before we get to those thoughts, actually, I do want to hit on concerns, is we have a lack of transparency in the system. Again, where we would have criminal defendants who could know who was accusing them and what the crime was. We don't have that with SafeSport, nor do we have public access to their records or how they resolve cases. Whereas anybody, I'd happily teach you how to do it, can go online and check a criminal docket and see who's been convicted of what and what sentence they got in federal court. I mean, I can pull up records. It's a parlor trick. Sometimes people see something on TV and they'll ask me, is that true? And I can pull it up for them in minutes. And there is a cost associated. I think it's 5 or 10 cents a page that the US government charges to access the records, but they're open to everybody. Every concerned person can go in and see it. We don't have that with SafeSport. So, and it makes it very hard for the media to be a watchdog. It makes it very hard for concerned athletes and citizens to be watchdogs. We've had Congress try to remove traditional remedies in court so that athletes or coaches who have gone through the system either as victims or as alleged wrongdoers don't have any judicial redress. SafeSport is the one and only stop for this. And you can't sue then. Again, SafeSport's answer to the Moors is you can't sue us. And then discouraging people from pursuing coaching. This is actually a problem that I've had several people discuss with me, including the Moors attorney, whom I've talked to. And especially for people with professional licenses at stake, I know I would not get certified as a coach in the Olympic movement in the United States, because if there was a report against me, I'd have to let the Bar Association know, and I could be suspended as an attorney. Whether or not that report ultimately resulted in any sort of finding against me, I would need to report it. I think it's arguable whether you have to or not, but I wouldn't mess with my law license. I'd report it to the bar and let them know SafeSport was investigating me. So I wouldn't take that chance, given the chance of a false report. And then the online database, if you're listed there, that can affect your ability to get employment, housing. It's publicly accessible, and more people are using it for background checks. But I want to give you a little look at a court decision that came out 30 years ago, before SafeSport, before all this, and it involved wrongdoing with the U.S. equestrian team. There was an allegation against a man that he had had his horse killed intentionally to collect the insurance. Heinous allegation. It was horrible. The facts are terrible. But the court gave us a very good statement of why we have to be careful with these situations. And what the court said is that it should be noted that ever since the time, which has become known as the age of McCarthyism, we have become much more reluctant to act hastily, to suspend people based on mere assertion or accusation. Nevertheless, there may be some compelling circumstances where maintenance of the status quo and the retention of accused persons in sensitive positions pending a plenary trial cannot be tolerated. Courts, corporations, and private associations have been painfully groping for a sensible solution, which will be fair to all concerned. So yes, sometimes we need to suspend people, but how do we do it where we respect everybody's rights and we make sure it's a transparent system that keeps in mind that sometimes things do go awry and you may not have a Larry Nasser on the other end of it. You may have an Alexis Moore. So I want to come back and exit screen sharing. I'd love to get in touch with people through LinkedIn. If you want to stay in touch, please let me know. And if you ever want to talk about these issues, I really do genuinely enjoy sharing about them. But do we have any questions? Let me look. Yes. So I've got a couple interesting comments here. And one is about the collegiate environment. And basically, SafeSport is limited to the Olympic movement. And so you don't have SafeSport in the NCAA. You don't have SafeSport officially in those. Obviously, there are other mechanisms, but this is unique at this point to the Olympic movement. But I would bring up that there are issues in terms of expanding this model to other areas that would affect collegiate sports. Congress has had bills proposed now that would expand the nonprofit independent agency model that would not be subject to constitutional protections, which is another question in the box here, in the NIL context, to have an agency that would police agents and NIL issues and those who are seeking to represent college athletes. It would be an independent nonprofit agency that would do that and would be exempt from, government oversight and judicial remedies. And again, I'm not sure that's the best way to handle it, given some of the transparency issues. There's another question or comment here that would there be an implication of Fifth Amendment rights by not knowing your accuser? And as a criminal defense attorney, I would say yes. And if you're interested in that, we'll talk a lot more about that at CERLA and some of the constitutional challenges that could be brought to some of these procedures. And then I see it's like okay to say. I'm not exactly sure what that means. If Christine wants to expand on that a little, I'd happily address. But if I'm interpreting it as we want to speak up, we want everyone to feel okay and welcome reporting wrongdoing, and we want those who take these reports to believe the accusers, that's important. When you get into evidence on forensic interviewing of children, it's very important that we create an environment where we listen to people and we believe them and we take their allegations seriously. That's critical, and people need to be educated to accept those reports as truthful. But then we need another set of employees who also look out for the rights of the accused. So we need the good use to go on, and we need the non-use to be mitigated, and we need the misuse to be eliminated.
Real quick, this is Michael Carroll. I'm Claire's advisor. First, I would just encourage all of you, if you're interested in this, you can easily find the complaint online. And that's the really nice thing about technology now. I mean, when I was years ago writing my dissertation, I mean, we couldn't, you had to have access to certain databases to find lawsuits. And now almost anything, you can find almost anything complaint-wise is online. And you can go in and read the allegations against these two women, as well as their responses, or I guess in the complaint, their attorney's responses, and why they seem to be so upset over the way that this was handled. And I think that it might help, Claire, if you just give a fifth grader understanding explanation of due process, because I think that helps explain a lot of what the frustration was on the part of these two women and how SafeSport handled their investigation. They allege a lack of due process.
Really quickly, because I know time's an issue, but basically under the Fifth and Sixth Amendments, you have a due process right to know who's accusing you in a criminal proceeding, to know what the crime is that they're accusing you of, to be provided with the discovery so that you see the records that they've provided to the government, any proof of this crime, and then you have a right to be brought before a jury of your peers and have that jury adjudicate whether or not you committed wrongdoing. And we simply don't have any of those procedural protections within this or anything comparable to them. And I think there would be a way to create a comparable, transparent system within the SafeSport paradigm.
Awesome. I'm going to have to stop everybody there. This has been a great conversation. Claire, thank you for sharing with us. And Michael, thank you for being here as well. We really appreciate your time. And as Claire noted, if y'all have any more questions, feel free to attend Surla or to get in touch with her via LinkedIn so that you can continue this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.